is coming to 32nd and Cypress. And also, truck company, if you've got one available. John, we got one casualty right here. It's going to be in between decks with people trapped. So let's start to...
All right. Thank you, Richard. I really thank the group for inviting me here tonight to speak. And I'm really impressed by what you've done. And by the time I'm through, I hope you feel that your efforts to date have been valuable, and down the road will be even more invaluable. For a little bit more perspective, I live in Danville now, but in 1974, my wife and I moved across country via 8 months in Managua, Nicaragua, and we settled in California, and we settled in Walnut Creek. And we lived in Walnut Creek until 1992, and then for a number of reasons, we moved down to Danville. And our first home in Walnut Creek was in Eichler. And my daughter now lives in the Eichler developments in Walnut Creek, too. So I have a very, very warm spot for the city, and my wife and I are up here all the time babysitting. So what I would like to do tonight is to give you, if I can get my PowerPoint to go, an overview of earthquake hazards here in Contra Costa County. And I hope what you walk away with is a better understanding of how the earth is working here, what we face down the road, what the likelihood is, what the uncertainty is, and hopefully all of this information can be used in the work that you're doing. By the way, how many people have seen this movie, Earthquake? Okay, quite a number. I recommend it. It's one of the best bad movies ever made. But it gives you a really nice feel. It was made in '75. It gives you a very good feel for what an urban earthquake is really like. And what I'd like to do is just run now through a series of slides. And starting in April of 2009, we've had a series of damaging earthquakes around the world. And people have said, are we seeing more frequent earthquakes? You know, is the planet getting ready to fall apart? And I'll show you why that's not the case. But what we've really seen is earthquakes of all different sizes, of different types of fault movements, in different tectonic and geologic settings, affect populated areas. If an earthquake occurs in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, unless it produces a tsunami, you hear about it, but nobody really cares. But these earthquakes that have occurred since 2009 have struck population centers. And the statistics are on the slide, and here are just examples. So this is L'Aquila, Italy in April of 2009. The Haiti earthquake, which killed 225,000 people in January of 2010. The magnitude 8.8 Chile earthquake of February 2010. And most of the people who died there died from the tsunami. In April of last year, we had an earthquake just south of Mexicali in northern Baja. That was followed shortly by an earthquake in Qinghai, China that killed over 2,000 people. Then in September of 2010, we had what's called a Darfield earthquake in New Zealand. It affected Christchurch, and this line going through here, this is the fault that actually moved and produced the earthquake, and you can see this hedgerow is actually offset by about 15 feet. And there were quite a number of teams that went out to Christchurch, looked at the damage, came back, and they were very, very optimistic. They said, wow, this is great. New buildings did very well. Unreinforced masonry buildings that had been retrofit came through very well, and that bodes well for us here in California with our retrofit program, and everybody was feeling pretty good. And then in February of this year, there was a magnitude 6.1, either a triggered earthquake or an aftershock of the 7.1 in September, and it was directly underneath Christchurch. Christchurch is built on very poor soils. They're saturated sands and gravels. There was extensive liquefaction. And this 6.1, which is something we discuss, over cocktails or at the water fountain at work, killed over 150 people. It did damage to 100,000 buildings. And what you're looking at in this slide is this building is now this building. And this is from a 6.1. So it was a small earthquake, but it was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then, of course, we had the Tohoku earthquake in March of this year. And the earthquake was bad enough. It was an indication of what we'll see in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S., Washington, Oregon, British Columbia, northernmost California. But it wasn't so much the shaking. It was the tidal wave, the tsunami. And in this amazing photo, you can see the tsunami rolling into this populated area. And right now, I think the death toll is around 25 or 26,000. But I've never seen a response to an earthquake shown by the public as I've seen the response to this. It really touched a nerve. And I don't know if it's the fact that the tsunami was so incredible. I don't think Hollywood could have created a tsunami that looked the way the real one did. Or the fact that Japan is viewed as a very, very technically advanced country, and it really suffered this great tragedy. But people have really thought about preparedness much more strongly, at least from my perspective, following this earthquake than all the talking we do, all the yelling we do at you to get ready because the big one is coming. And then that was, shortly after that, we had, in March of this year, an earthquake in Myanmar. And that killed about 100 people. It was overshadowed by Japan. But these earthquakes, as I said, have occurred in populated areas. And this is a graph that shows from 1900 to the present. Along this axis, we're looking at earthquake magnitude. And you can see that through time, the rate of earthquakes of all different magnitudes has remained relatively constant. So we're not seeing an increase in the frequency of large earthquakes around the world. It's just that a few have occurred closer together in time, and they've occurred in populated areas where today, within seconds of the earthquake, Twitter information is coming out telling you what's going on. And in this series of graphs, you can see the top in red are estimated deaths from earthquakes, and we go from 1990 to the present. These boxes show the number of earthquakes of different magnitudes. And just for example, if you look at magnitude 7 to 7.9, just look at the numbers. I think that says 18, 16, 13, and that same number is all the way across the board. So we're really, really not seeing a change in the frequency of events. Now, let me say something about the Bay Area's past. So I'd like to put where we are in perspective of the whole Bay Area. Our first really major earthquake in the Bay Area that we have good information on was in 1868 along the Hayward Fault. It caused a lot of damage in the East Bay, and it caused a lot of damage in the city. And these are photographs and line drawings in newspapers of damage in San Francisco. And the San Jose Mercury News said, "We need to correct our style of architecture to work a savings of untold sums of money in the future. Fix it now. It's easier to fix it now than try and fix it later." And what was said in 1868 is just as true today, because we're not there yet. Of course, we had 1906, and here's a before and after. And the great tragedy in this earthquake was not so much the shaking, but it was the fire that followed it. And in fact, if you look at pictures of the financial district, within hours of the earthquake, people are just standing around in the streets. You almost see nothing in the way of fallen bricks or facades. All of the buildings are there. They were building with steel frame construction in the early 1900s, and there was not a single collapse of a major building in the financial district. But the fire whipped through and took out the city. And then, of course, 1989. How many people were here in 1989? Great, just about everybody. So you got a little taste of what lies down the road. So what does lie down the road? Well, from my perspective, I think it's great. We live in the boundary zone. The Bay Area is in the boundary zone between two Great Plates. It sits in the zone between the North American plate and the Pacific plate. And these red lines on this slide are the major faults in the Bay Area. So we have San Gregorio, San Andreas, the Calaveras Fault, which becomes the Hayward Fault, which becomes the Rogers Creek Fault. And then part of the Calaveras Fault continues up towards us in the San Ramon Valley and stops around Danville. And we go further to the east. We have the Greenville Fault near Livermore, a big fault underneath Mount Diablo, which I'll talk about, and then the Concord Green Valley Fault. And so the Bay Area has the highest density of active faults per square mile of any urban center in the United States. Just something to think about. And for an earthquake geologist, this is absolutely a wonderful place to work. And fundamentally, as the plates are sliding past each other and they're moving at depth, stress is being put into the region at a rate of about 40 millimeters a year, about this much. And it doesn't sound like much, but over time, over 100 years, a lot of stress builds up, and that stress has to be released. And it's released by mostly instantaneous movement on faults. And when a fault moves, it's like snapping your fingers. Go ahead, do it. Okay? You just made an earthquake. The Earth does exactly the same thing. Stress builds up. There is pressure on either side of the fault. When the strength of the fault is overcome, the rock on either side slips, just like your fingers slide past each other. In doing that, you release energy. The Earth releases seismic waves. When you do this, you produce sound waves. It's basically the same process. So it's that snapping of the Earth's crust along a fault that releases seismic waves, and that's the earthquake that you feel. All right? Well, we've been able to look back at the history of the Bay Area, and this is what we like to call our tombstone diagram. You have to have a little bit of sense of humor in this business. And what you're looking at are these gray rectangles, and they give the magnitude and the date of past earthquakes. And from newspaper reports and analysis of the distribution and the amount of damage, people at the USGS have been able to reconstruct a complete earthquake history of magnitude 5.5 and larger going back to about 1850. And you can see before 1906, the Bay Area really rocked and rolled. I mean, there were magnitude 5, 6s and 5, 8s and 5, 9s happening just all the time. Then 1906 occurred. And 1906, it was like taking a balloon and popping the balloon and letting all the air out. 1906, when it slipped, when the San Andreas slipped, it released all the stress in the region. And everything relaxed. And it set all of the faults back on their path to failure. And you can see in the 20th century, we had really a small amount of seismicity and earthquakes, the largest being Loma Prieta. So this is called the stress shadow. And it's during this period of anomalously low activity that our population grew, our infrastructure was developed, and people who have lived in the Bay Area all their lives say, oh, I know what earthquakes are like. And I can guarantee you, you don't know what earthquakes are like. And you'll be very surprised by what's coming down the road. So how do we go back beyond our recorded history? Well, this is the kind of work that I do, and this is what's called paleoseismology, or the study of ancient earthquakes. And what you're looking at here is, you see a little step in the ground surface? You can see that step? from here to here. This is the Hayward Fault. And this is the Hayward Fault on the second fairway of the Mira Vista Golf Course in El Cerrito. And so the golf course was built in 1912, and it hasn't been modified. And we thought this would be a really, really wonderful place to study the Hayward Fault. So we went to the Board of Governors, and we said, we'd like to put a trench across your second fairway. And they looked at us like we were, you know, you're geologists, we know what you guys do. You're really messy. But anyway, we talked them into it. And this is the trench excavated with a backhoe. And this slide is looking into the trench. And these are some of the different deposits or layers. And you can see this light one is disconnected from this light one. This was the most recent rupture on the fault. With radiocarbon, we were able to date that as occurring between about 1670 and 1776. So this is the northern part of the Hayward. The southern part broke in 1868. And then these are just some other deposits. This light colored material is ash from local fires. And this is what we look at. And we've done that for all of the major faults in the Bay Area. And this is the history that's come out since 1600. So we go 1600 to the present. The vertical scale is estimated magnitude of these earthquakes. There were no seismographs at the time. And what you can see is in red, Loma Prieta, then 1906, then the 1868 Southern Hayward earthquake. And we think there was an earthquake on the peninsula section of the San Andreas in 1838. And then we have a gap in large earthquakes. This white line is the construction of the Mission Dolores in San Francisco, which gives us a very nice historical record from that point in time. And then from the trenches, which I showed you an example of, all of these yellow lines represent estimated times of the most recent large earthquake on the Northern Calaveras Fault, the Northern San Andreas, the Rogers Creek, the Southern Hayward, the San Gregorio, the Northern Hayward, and the Concord Green Valley. So in a period of less than 100 years, every fault in the Bay Area produced a large earthquake. And this is what we call a cluster. The amount of energy released during this cluster is very comparable to the amount of energy released by 1906. And there was, in general, a period of quiet following it. And all of the faults shown here have not moved in at least 300 years. And they have to move because the plates are moving all the time, and all of these faults have to catch up. So what we see in this cluster is what lies out ahead of us. All right, so what do we do with this information? Well, we've put together a number of different earthquake probabilities reports. And if you can't read in the back, on the bottom it says, thank God, a panel of experts. So here's the working group. And this is me, actually. I chaired the 99 group. I co-chaired the 2002 group. And I've been a reviewer of the 2008 group. And we've taken all of this information that we've generated on the different faults, how frequently they moved, when the most recent large earthquake was, and then conceptually, if you're further away from the last one, you're closer to the next one. And we've come up with a number of different earthquake probability scenarios. So in 2003, we released really our first major complex report. And we estimated that for the Bay Area, the probability in the next 30 years was 62%. Now, why 30 years? Well, it's the length of your mortgage. So everybody can relate to that, seriously. And also, it's a reasonable period of time to think about engineering, about development of areas of construction and lifetimes of buildings. If we gave you a 1-year probability, everybody would yawn. If we gave you a 100-year probability, which we could do, you know, it's right there. So we picked this 30 years. And at the bottom, you'll see 38 to 85%. We never really talk about the uncertainties. So everybody knows 62%, or in the more recent report released in 2008, 63%. But these are the uncertainties. So these numbers have, you know, they're not cast in stone. So maybe we're only at 38%, but maybe the next 30 years we're at 85%. All right, so this is just something you should keep in mind. But these are the numbers. So 2008, there was a statewide study done, and we used basically the same data for the Bay Area, and we came up with, luckily, not luckily, but it would have been terrible if we came up with a very, very different number than we had in '03, but we came up with 63%. So that's basically our bottom line right now. Everything being equal, the mean probability for the next 30 years, about 2 out of 3 chance that we'll have one or more magnitude 6.7 or larger earthquakes in the middle of the Bay Area. Now, whoops. When we look at the distribution of that probability, we see that we actually have a higher, this is bragging rights. We have higher probability in the East Bay. So there's about a 46% chance versus 34 in the West Bay. And you can't add the probabilities directly. There's a formula, but this is our 63%. And this higher probability in the East Bay comes from having the Calaveras, the Hayward, the Northern Calaveras, the Greenville, Mount Diablo, Concord Green Valley, and the Rogers Creek faults. All right? So let me say something about Contra Costa's faults. And I'll only talk about its geologic faults. This kind of shotgun map is actually showing you the little black dots are the locations of earthquakes between 1984 and 2002. And it's just a snapshot in time. And these have been relocated by computer. So these locations are good within 100 feet of where the epicenter of that earthquake actually was. And they show different trends, different orientations. But I want to point out a few things. But first I want to show you what we've had in the way of larger earthquakes historically, and we haven't had many. It's been pretty quiet out here. So in 1861, we had an earthquake along the Calaveras Fault in the San Ramon Valley in Dublin area. And then in 1954, we had a magnitude 5.5 in Concord. In 1980, we had 2 earthquakes near Livermore on the Greenville Fault. These are small, 5.7 and 5.8. They did damage. And then actually in 1986, we had a 5.7 pretty much out in the middle of nowhere. This is called a Mount Lewis earthquake, but there were a lot of aftershocks. And you can see how the aftershocks actually outlined the trace of the fault. So this is the Calaveras Fault down here. This is the Hayward Fault. This is the Northern Calaveras, which almost has no seismicity on it. And then you'll see this sort of cluster of earthquakes. This is the San Ramon Valley area. And I'll show you a few more details about these different structures. So here's a Google Earth graphic looking to the west. And here's the Greenville Fault. Big fault under Mount Diablo. The Concord Fault. This is the Calaveras. And the Hayward's on the other side. The San Andreas is in the background. This red ellipse is the estimated location of the part of the fault that broke in 1861. And this figure down here shows the distribution of the intensity of shaking that's been modeled from the damage reports. And this is actually an adobe that was damaged at the time. But we think this part of the Calaveras is not going to produce just these small earthquakes. We think this is capable of a 6.8. We think that happens every 180 to 400 years. And the last large one was probably around 1740. So in the next 30 years, we've got about a 6% chance. That's the average probability for the Northern Calaveras. Here's Walnut Creek. All right. Here's Danville, and I live just over here. And what you're looking at this is a map that shows the locations of earthquake swarms A swarm of earthquakes is a sequence of small earthquakes that occur in a very short period of time. And starting around 1970, these swarms began to occur, and this is pretty unique to the Bay Area. And the numbers that you're looking at, this is the date. So this is 1990. This is the biggest swarm. Some of you might remember this. This was in Alamo and Round Hill. There were 351 earthquakes in 42 days, and the largest was a 4.4, and this actually produced damage to homes with chimneys being damaged, and it really, really upset people. So in the San Ramon Valley area, this is something that is a fairly common occurrence. And then we're going to step across to the Greenville Fault. So here's the Greenville. We don't really have a lot of information on this fault. It's big. And this red ellipse is where two earthquakes occurred in 1980, a 5.7 and a 5.8. We think the Greenville moves every 220 to about 540 years. We think it can produce at least a 6.9. And the last really large earthquake was over 210 years ago. The official probability is 3%, which is really small in 30 years, but it may be as high as 10%. And this is just some of the damage done in 1980. These are wine tanks out at Wente, and there are a lot more wine tanks sitting out in the Livermore Valley now than there were in 1980. All right, so one other thing I just wanted to point out, this blue line, this is Hetch Hetchy. This is the Hetch Hetchy water system that brings water to San Francisco. And San Francisco PUC has spent, or in the process of spending $4 billion from their bond issue to upgrade the Hetch Hetchy system. And they've worked on the Calaveras Fault and the Hayward Fault and the crossing in the South Bay, but they've done nothing with the Greenville. And the first port of entry of Hetch Hetchy water into the Bay Area is in the Coast Range Tunnel, which is at a depth of about 400 feet below the surface, and it crosses the Greenville Fault. Now, if the Greenville moves, and it moves 9 or 10 feet, which it's capable of, the tunnel, which only has a diameter of 9 feet, will be closed off, and that will cut off the main water supply to San Francisco. So that's just something to think about. As the plates move and slip is released, the slip that moves along the Greenville Fault tries to step over to the Concord Fault, and in doing so, it produces a zone of compression or squeezing or folding, and that results in pushing the crust up, and that uplift of the crust is Mount Diablo. So Mount Diablo is not a volcano. Mount Diablo is a large fold in the Earth's surface, and beneath that fold is a fault which we call the Mount Diablo Thrust Fault, and it's what we call a blind fault because you can't see it at the surface like the Hayward or the San Andreas. But blind faults have produced damage in California. The Coalinga earthquake on the western side of the Central Valley, 1983, was a 6.7. The Whittier Narrows earthquake in 1987. Loma Prieta was on a blind fault. It wasn't on the San Andreas Fault, and Northridge was on a blind fault in 1994. And what you're looking in this little inset, these red dots are the locations of aftershocks from the San Fernando earthquake, which was this is from the Northridge earthquake, and you can see the inclination, the angle of these aftershocks, and that basically is what we have modeled underneath Mount Diablo. And this is a view of Mount Diablo from my front porch. So I sit directly, our house is directly up the projection of the Mount Diablo blind thrust. So if you're going to do this work, you might as well live dangerously. And finally, I want to mention the Concord Green Valley Fault. The Concord Fault is a continuation of the system on the east side of Contra Costa and Alameda counties. And as I said, in 1955, there was a 5.4 shown by this red ellipse. There was actually one fatality. And this is probably our urban fault out here in Contra Costa County. What you're looking at is a Google photo with this red line. This is the fault going through downtown Concord. This is a pond. It's called Laguna Lake. It's formed by the fault branching into two pieces, and it's pulled the upper part of the crust apart and made a little depression or a sag, which is now a nice little lake. And here it is with apartments along it, and here's the fault. The fault has a little bit of creep. It's moving all the time like the Hayward, and if you look down the sidewalk, you can see how it bends like this and then continues. So the Concord Fault goes right through here. If you go out on Market Street in Concord, there's a little bit of a step up at the end of Market Street. This is the Concord Fault running through it. And if you're out on Willow Pass Road in Concord, you'll look by Park and Shop, and there's a step in Willow Pass Road, and that's the Concord Fault. So people drive over this all the time, don't have a clue that it's there. And we think the Concord produces magnitude 6.7s, maybe 6.8s, about every 220 years. The last large earthquake was in 1705 or thereabouts. So you can do the math. We're kind of right there on average. The probability officially was 3%, and we think it could be as much as 7%. All right? So right now in our formal estimates for the Greenville, as I said, we're at 3%, but with the uncertainties and using new satellite GPS data, we think the faults are moving faster than we've given them credit for, and so the probabilities can be higher, 7.5 to 10.5 for the Greenville, and up to 7 for the Concord Green Valley. So when we just take these faults, the Calaveras, Mount Diablo, Greenville, Concord Green Valley, given the uncertainties in the next 30 years, we're at 15 to 27% that one of these is going to produce a large earthquake right here in the middle of Contra Costa County. And another issue, which I'll just mention briefly, is that here's the fault system. You go further to the east, and you run into the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, and the delta is outlined in this light color. And these faults, looking out over a 100-year period of time, can produce ground motions or shaking that can lead to failure of the levees. And what these colored bands are, this is work done by URS Corporation. These are generalized zones of different strengths of shaking, and the blue zone here is at a level of ground shaking that will reduce in levee failures. And our real concern is if we having failure of the delta that will really take out the water supply to Southern California. So what I'd like to do is, how am I doing on time? I'm okay? All right. I'd like to show you a little animation that we put together with the USGS. And we've done these for the San Andreas and for the Hayward Fault, and we've taken different rupture scenarios, different ways the fault might behave, and try to model the shaking as we think it will occur. And what I'm going to show you, there are two sides of this to look at. In the map view, Walnut Creek is right here. Here's Livermore. So this is a map view. We're going to start the earthquake on the Hayward Fault up in San Pablo Bay. And then this is a perspective from just to the east of Livermore, looking in this direction. So let me, I think in all the fooling around, the animation died. So it won't start. Well, what you would have seen, Richard has seen it. What you would have seen was bands of different colors begin to move out, representing the different levels of shaking and the different seismic waves. And the first waves are called P waves or primary waves, and they move the ground back and forth. And so if an earthquake occurred and I was standing up here, I might actually feel my knees sort of bend, and then that would be followed by a pop under the floor. That's the S wave, or the surface wave, which moves up and down, coming in. And it's a little slower, but it really produces most of the damage. And what you would have seen is that these, within about 8 or 9 seconds, even an earthquake starting in San Pablo Bay, the strongest shaking would have completely covered the area we're in now and would have spread out to engulf the entire Livermore Valley and extend out into the Sacramento Delta. So take my word for it, and maybe afterwards I'll be able to get another version of this to go. One of the big things affecting what kind of damage there is the local geology. And here's an example from Loma Prieta. These are seismograms, all the same earthquake, but you'll notice this has just a few squiggles on it. This is very, very large, and this is somewhat intermediate. All of these stations, seismographs, were on different types of material. This is the cypress structure, and the dotted part is the part that collapsed. And you can see for the seismograph that was on bedrock, we have a relatively weak signal. For the seismograph that was on soft mud, that's where the cypress structure was, we have a very much larger signal. And then we have something intermediate on sand and gravel. So the kind of near-surface material has a major impact on how these seismic waves are translated into shaking, affecting structures. Now, when we look around San Francisco Bay, here's the bay, and there'll be a test on these colors after I'm finished. But the light purple is stream deposits and bay deposits, and they're soft sediments, they're muds, they're saturated. The deep purple is artificial fill, and then the yellow is sand and gravel that's been deposited from the hills out onto flatter areas. But it's the fills and the bay muds that really are very, very susceptible to shaking. They amplify the shaking and they liquefy. So anything built in these regions stands a stronger chance of being damaged. When we look closely at the what we call a liquefaction susceptibility map, and that's the likelihood that an area will liquefy. Here's Walnut Creek. It's really out along the bayshore that we have our highest likelihood, but this is Ignacio Valley. This is where we're sitting right now, and we're moderate. And there is a relatively high water table in a lot of this area. So if we have one of these close-in earthquakes, we can expect this area to actually have stronger shaking than some of the surrounding areas. And this is true all the way down the San Ramon Valley out into the Livermore Valley. That next large earthquake on the Hayward Fault is what we call an infrastructure earthquake, because everything in the Bay Area crosses the fault, crosses many faults, crosses the areas of bad ground around the bay, and all of these different colored lines are different parts of the infrastructure: gas lines, electrical transmission lines. This is Hetch Hetchy in blue, East Bay Mud in dark blue. Everything crosses the major faults, and particularly the water systems have very, very high susceptibility to major damage, particularly from liquefaction. Now, what kind of actual dollar loss might we have? It's very hard to really get a very accurate handle, but RMS, Risk Management Solutions out of Newark, California, has done a study. You can find it online at this address. And they've taken our Hayward Fault scenarios, and they've taken all of the available building stock inventory, and they've run loss models for just commercial and residential real estate. And what you're looking at are the different counties affected by a magnitude 7 on the Hayward Fault. And in the orange scenario, the earthquake starts in San Pablo Bay. It's the one I would have shown you had the animation worked, and propagates, runs to the south. Teal, this is the Sharks color, and hope they do better in the next game against Detroit. The earthquake starts in the middle of the fault and goes in both directions. And then in purple, it starts at the south and it goes to the north. And depending on the direction of the rupture, we get different effects and we get different losses. So here in Contra Costa County, the estimated dollar amount economic loss is a little over $40 billion if we have an earthquake that starts in San Pablo Bay and propagates to the south. And then you can see the other estimates. But regardless of where the earthquake starts on the Hayward Fault, we're looking at high economic losses out here in Contra Costa County. So we've got water supply issues, and along with water supply and gas main breaks is sewage. And so when the ground pulls apart, all of this stuff really kind of fails. And I think East Bay Mud and SFPUC have done a very nice job where their pipelines cross the main faults. But it's the distribution system. It's the smaller pipelines that go out to your homes, to your businesses, and if they fail, it's going to be not 72 hours, but it might be 72 days before the stuff is repaired. We have the issue of fire following earthquake. 1906, yes, the city was engulfed, but this is a photograph taken on Balboa Boulevard in the Granada Hills following Northridge. And what happened was the earthquake, the shaking ruptured both water and gas mains. Electrical lines broke and started a fire, which you can see here. Actually, the gas was floating on the water and was burning. These homes caught fire. And think of that happening out here, and think of grasslands catching fire from the burning homes. And this stuff spreading. So this fire following an earthquake is not localized to a house, but it really has the potential, a hot summer day with strong winds, there can be tremendous problems. We all know we're going to have major communication problems, certainly right after an event. And this is something that concerns us throughout the entire Bay Area, and these are residential vulnerabilities. And in particular, what we call soft first-story failures. So all of these photos are taken in the marina following Loma Prieta, and these are all 2-, 3-story buildings with parking, open parking spaces underneath, so that first story has no strength to withstand the shaking. This is the marina on the bottom. I have this photograph. I don't know where it was taken. It wasn't taken by me, but you can see really what a soft first story looks like. These columns don't have very much strength. And we've got these throughout Contra Costa County. And I just stopped in Walnut Creek to take a few photos. And this is the Arbor Apartments just off of Walker. This is Trinity House on Trinity Avenue. This is the first place my wife and I lived in when we moved to Walnut Creek. And you can see across the street, I think this is Trinity Arms, all saw first story. And then this is Greenwood condominiums, and they're already leaning over. But we have throughout Walnut Creek, Concord area, and other parts of the Bay Area, we have really an unquantified inventory of these soft first-story buildings, and it's a big problem. It's a huge problem in San Francisco. It's a huge problem in Oakland. And the other issue which people don't really talk about very much and don't do very much about is what's called non-structural damage. And what you're looking at in these photographs, you're looking at damage in hospitals following the Northridge earthquake, and where fundamentally everything inside of the hospitals was trashed. Buildings were structurally sound, but the plumbing, all of the electrical equipment, the operating equipment, everything was just tossed around. And actually it was this earthquake and this type of damage that led to Senate Bill 1953, which requires all hospitals by 2013 or 15 to be able to function during and following large earthquakes. But this is a problem we all face. The Christchurch earthquake in New Zealand, there was a tremendous amount of non-structural damage, which really rendered many buildings, even though they were structurally sound, useless for a significant period of time. And I know I don't have things bolted down in my house. I don't have things Velcro to the walls. But this is a real issue. And I think people sitting here and people in this community are going to have much stronger effects in the way of non-structural damage than in actual physical damage to their wood frame home. All right? I'm going to try and wrap up. I think there is a reason to be optimism, a reason for optimism. We've learned a lot about earthquakes over the years. One beautiful example of really kind of figuring out a problem, I like to show this, is the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. So this is the pipeline. This is a photograph taken in the winter of 2002, and there had just been a large earthquake, magnitude 7.9 on the Denali Fault. Now, the pipeline was constructed with the fault in mind, and what you're looking at, if I can get the cursor to work, here's the pipeline. These are Teflon skids that allow the pipeline to move back and forth, and actually the fault crosses directly beneath it. And when the study was done, there was an estimate of 20 feet of movement on that fault in its next large earthquake. And the study was done by a very, very good group of young geologists. And this was the group. And if you want to actually leave or get coffee or have a cookie after we're through, you have to identify me in this photograph. Okay, so just call out some numbers. What was that? 12. 14. Okay, so this was me when the study was done in 1973, and it's amazing, still amazing to me that my wife's mother let her marry me looking the way I did. But this is just, here's a view of the pipeline before the earthquake, and here are the Teflon pads. Here's the pipeline after the earthquake, and the yellow line is the pre-earthquake configuration, and the fault broke right through here. The point is that it was engineered, the problem was studied, a solution was found, and it was really carried fully through. A lot of that work has been done in the Bay Area since Loma Prieta. The region has spent more than $30 billion in all sorts of retrofits and upgrades. But the question is, are we done? The answer is no. And is there enough time? Is that Bay Bridge going to be finished before the next large event? So, just to summarize, it's been really quiet out here historically in Contra Costa. But large earthquakes are in our future, and our feeling is sooner rather than later. The major East Bay faults that I've mentioned, or the major plate boundary faults, are going to affect Concord and Walnut Creek, Alamo, Danville, San Ramon, Pleasanton, Livermore, and the other side of the hills, El Cerrito and Richmond. And our probabilities in the East Bay over the next 30 years, by the year 2037, we're looking at 40 to 50% of a 6.7 or larger somewhere in the East Bay on one of these faults. So, how much stress is too much stress? Where are we now? I think we're down here, which is almost assuredly too much stress. And the question is, and Gail kind of addressed this earlier, can this idea of preparedness really be maintained? And I think this is really, really important because I've given you these earthquake statistics, but what if the earthquake doesn't happen for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, which is possible? Can you maintain this drive to keep things going? Because eventually it's going to happen. So that's up to you. I'd just like to finish with on October 11th of this coming year at 10:20 in the morning, there's the Shakeout 2011. I think most of you are familiar with it. I urge you to go to the Shakeout website at www.shakeout.org. Already there are 51,000 people from Contra Costa County who've registered to participate. There's only one CERT group shown on the website, so I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but I really urge you to look at this and to participate, because this is one way of perpetuating the idea of preparedness, particularly with our school children, to drop, cover, and hold. And lastly, I'd just like to encourage you to go to the Bay Area Earthquake Alliance website, bayquakealliance.org. There's a tremendous amount of information. There's a map on the bottom that shows the distribution of members. I'd really like to encourage the CERT groups here in Contra Costa to join us. It's a neat group. We have the kind of talk I'm giving. We really go around the Bay Area trying to pull in as many types of groups of preparedness and first responders as possible to talk about the science of earthquakes here in the Bay Area. So please go to the Bay Area Earthquake Alliance site, and I will just leave you with our earthquake threat condition is severe. Thank you very much.
That was a great talk, Dr. Schwartz. We've got time for just a few, 2 or 3 questions. I'd like to get the microphone to you so everybody can hear what the question is. If anybody has a question, raise your hand and I'll saunter on over. Okay, right up here in the front row.
The biggest surprise for me, what you said, was that Mount Diablo was not a volcano. I was always told it was a volcano.
So you've learned something tonight.
And this is no volcanic activity at all. It was just completely folding.
Yes, I mean the last time Mount Diablo saw volcanic activity was probably 140 million years ago. So,
okay, back here.
Dr. Schwartz, if you superimposed volcanic activity over the slide you had for worldwide earthquake activity, what would that slide look like, or is that a totally different talk?
That's a totally different talk.
We, in our CERT area, we've taken the census data, and we know we have 11,016 citizens in our CERT area, at least for the last census. We have, my question is, are there methodologies for understanding a range of victim or casualty percentages based on that size of population? That's, I'm probably asking a crystal ball question. On the other hand, it's a key input to our planning.
I'm not sure I heard you completely, but you were asking about estimating casualties.
Yes, so
That's the hardest. That's the hardest thing. It's much easier to estimate economic losses because there is a fixed inventory, and modelers know what certain types of buildings will do under certain ground shaking conditions. But in terms of casualties, it all comes down to things like the time of day, the time of the year, how many people are in buildings. There are estimates, but they're much, much less well constrained than actual economic loss. And I think in the RMS study for the Hayward Fault, they do have some estimates of casualties, of dead and injured. And then the city of San Francisco produced what's called the CAPS report, and they also estimated casualties. But these numbers are just much weaker than, as I said, estimates of economic loss. I don't know if I answered your question.
well, probably as best you could. It's the reason we're interested. I mean, we're literally stocking caches with supplies and, medical supplies and so forth. And it'd be great to have at least even wide bands based on our population. And maybe I totally understand why it'd be a function of time of day. If there's any work being done in that area or any, wide rules of thumb, that'd be a great tool.
Yeah, I mean, there probably are. I just can't give you off the top of my head, can't tell you where to go.
Okay, one more.
That picture showing the Bay Bridge going through the area of liquefaction, that entrance to the Bay Bridge was in that same area where during the Loma Prieta, the freeway failed. How far do they have to drill down through all that before they can get to any bedrock? And is the bridge hooked into any bedrock?
I don't know the exact depth. I mean, it was several hundred feet. That information actually is available online. You can go to the Caltrans website and check out the New Bay Bridge and find the specs of what they've done.
So
But they, one of the things that Caltrans is criticized for is, taking so long to put a new bridge in. But in many ways, some of this bickering between the Browns in Oakland and San Francisco, the mayors, which kind of pushed things back, and other aspects of the delay gave more time to do better engineering. So I really feel that the new eastern span of the Bay Bridge that goes in is going to do very well and has really been quite well engineered.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have. Let's thank Dr. Schwartz again.
This is coming to 32nd and Cypress. And also, truck company, if you've got one available. John, we got one casualty right here. It's going to be in between decks with people trapped. So let's start to...
Boundary Oak Golf Course. Located in the foothills of Walnut Creek, it boasts an 18-hole championship golf course, a driving range and practice area with putting and chipping greens. The perfect venue for golf tournaments, weddings, banquets, golf lessons, clinics, and camps.
In 1969, Boundary Oak Golf Course was created and opened for the public. It includes a championship golf course, a driving range, and a 30,000 square foot clubhouse that is used for banquets and special events. In July of 2009, Corsco Incorporated, a regional golf management company from Petaluma, took over management of the entire Boundary Oak Golf Course facility, both delivering golf and food and beverage in a seamless manner. Starting in July, Corsco made many changes to the golf course, including intensive maintenance, general cleanliness, new signage, and created a whole lot of customer-friendly features to the golf course to improve both the golf experience and the aesthetic look as well. In addition, they've made some improvements to the clubhouse itself. The dining facility for special events is now called the Clubhouse at Boundary Oak. Features a lot of specially created events that Corsco puts on, Mother's Day brunches, Easter brunch, and a variety of other events, including a fourth Friday of every month they do some specially themed event. In addition, we have an outdoor wedding site that we created with Corsco. The driving range has approximately 50 stalls, both a lower matted area and an upper area that is grass tees. It's one of the few areas in the East Bay where you can hit off of grass, and it's a great training facility. The driving range is open for a variety of hours, including nighttime, so that people who come from work and want to hit golf balls have that availability. It's open for kids to come in the afternoon after school. There's plenty of time for the golfer to come up and practice the game of golf, both from a hitting off the mats, off the grass tees, and also has putting areas, chipping areas, and the practice facility for bunker play as well. One of the great features of Boundary Oak, a great community venue, we're host to 3 high school teams. We have a great middle school and after-school program. We have junior golf camps. We are a site, an affiliate site for the First Tee program. We have a great ladies professional golf, girls golf program for girls 7 to 17. So we have programs here for all ages. We have golfers at any given day of the year. We have golfers here from 5 years of age to 105. Boundary Oak is a great place for learning to play golf. We have a variety of golf professionals, male and female, for any age group, young or old. We have people that are proficient at all age brackets, teaching all different types of golf. Golf professionals are on staff all day so that anybody